producer getting their product to market has a serious impact on their cash flow. In fact, it can be days or weeks of obstruction for farmers, and that ripple effect could last the entire season. Because when it comes to the movement of goods, it's not just the issue of the days workers don't show up. All the way down the supply chain, affected businesses need to adjust their schedules, and it can sometimes be weeks to get the system running smoothly again. Everyone deserves to have a safe workplace, a beneficial relationship with their employer that is built on a foundation of trust and goodwill. Just the same, businesses need to be able to operate and meet their clients' demands in a manner that allows them to continue to operate. My concern with this bill have nothing to do with workers' rights to organize or engage in collective bargaining, because Canadian workers undoubtedly have those rights. But labour legislation is always controversial in Canada. I want to be clear, there's a big difference between the boots on the ground and the suits in the union offices. The agendas are not always aligned. Conservatives believe that the government should work with unions and employers in areas of federal jurisdiction to develop dispute settlement mechanisms and encourage their use to avoid or minimize disruptions to services in Canada. But of course, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government, ironically, has put a lot of money into contract workers, and replacement workers is basically the same type of thing. GC Strategies, a two-person IT company that does no actual IT work, got paid nearly $20 million on the Arrive camp. Well, that money could have been spent much more wisely. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I have concerns about the impact and reach of this legislation. I have concerns about whether this bill draws the right balance between employer and employee. There are mixed signals, Mr. Speaker, from this government. On one hand, they speak glowingly about banning the use of replacement workers, but on the other hand, they are investing heavily in consultants. As Canada rebuilds from the pandemic, from the imposed mandates and the economic consequences of undisciplined spending, it is vital that we rebuild our economy and workforce with sound labour policies. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières.
The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. We repeated today that we are in favour of such a bill. We are concerned about the fact that it will take 18 days because, of course, this government will probably not be here then, and that concerns us. When it comes to CN, the Port of Montreal, and so on, would it not have been better to take advantage of this time to help them learn French?
Honorable député de Red Deer Mountain View.
Well, it would certainly have helped if I had learned some French over the years. But I think, my interpretation said 18 days, but it's 18 months, as we know. There are concerns, and part of what I was mentioning is if the House isn't sitting, and it's an expectation of having right-to-work legislation, when the House sits, we can deal with that when need be. But if it isn't, then all of a sudden it gets drug out. So we can always say, well, that's just allowing the process to work. However, it is because of the fact that we don't work our way through that problem. And I think maybe that is something that we should be looking at as well, because it is something that we see happens with the Ministry of Labour. And as I mentioned during my address, it's important that everybody is there talking to the Labour Minister, because there's a lot of other things that happen just rather than his discussion with businesses and employees.
Comments, questions, commentaires. The only member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I believe I heard my Conservative friend bemoan the fact that this bill was tabled in December, and yet here we are in late February still debating it. And so I have two simple questions. The first one is, does he wish that this bill was moved through the House more speedily? And secondly, will he be voting for this bill at second reading?
Honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe. Oh, sorry, Red Deer Mountain View.
Yeah, I'm on the south side of the city, sir. Well, I think what I had said, that it was a couple of years ago when it was first proposed, and now we do finally see it come into discussions. And of course, the other question was, should we have 18 months, there will be a different government in 18 months. And so I guess the question, still comes back to what have we heard? What are we looking at? Is there any assurances that by giving the restrictions on replacement workers, that is going to speed up negotiations? That's the question, and that is what I believe everyone is talking about here today.
Question commentaire, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I posed the other Conservative speakers, it's actually encouraging to hear members of the Conservative caucus talk relatively positive about the labour movement, but they have not been clear in terms of what their actual intentions are with regards to the legislation. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if the member, just listening to his speech, if he can reflect in terms of how it is that he'll actually be voting on the legislation itself.
For Red Deer Mountain View.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of Canadians that are suspenseful right now as well, because they would like to see what would happen if we ever had an opportunity to have an election. And so I'm prepared to listen to whatever the electorate says in that regard as well. I'm sure that we're talking about three Westerners from the Liberal Party. I hope that the member is one of them.
Comments, question commentaire, the Honourable Member for Provencher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague, the member from Red Deer Mountain View, for an excellent speech. Also want to publicly extend my sympathies to him on the passing of his close friend and brother-in-law, Charlie Moore, who he referenced in his speech. I've gotten to know the member really well on the Natural Resource Committee. I know he's a fierce advocate for his constituency of Red Deer Mountain View, as well as for agriculture, but specifically he's an advocate and a defender of the world's most ethical energy, and that's Alberta oil and gas. And so I want to thank the member for his advocacy. But, true to this Liberal form, this is another bill that seeks to divide Canadians. We've seen it over and over, whether it's on social, economic, whether it's cultural, regional issues. This Liberal NDP government has chosen to divide Canadians. And again, in this bill, we see that federal regulated industries are included as being captured in this bill, whereas federal employees are not. What's the fairness?
Honourable Member for Red Deer Mountain View, quickly.
Well, when you take a look at Part 1 of the Labour Code, it talks about, it says Part 1 of the code sets out rules for unionization, collective bargaining, and labour disputes in federally regulated sectors. More specifically applies to, and then it goes through the list, federally regulated private sector includes key industries such as banking, telecommunications, broadcasting, air, rail, and maritime transportation, most Crown corporations, for example, Canada Post, and First Nations band councils, also all private sector businesses and municipal governments in the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Yukon. So the question becomes, why are we taking certain groups and carving them out? There's really been no discussion from what I've heard in the last couple of days about that. And I think this is something that really deserves more of that thoughtfulness.
Continuing debate, reprise du débat. Is the House now ready for the question? The question is as follows. Mr. O'Regan, seconded by Ms. Ng, moves that Bill C-58, an act to amend the Canadian Labour Code and the Canada Industrial Relations Board Regulations 2012, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. If a member participating in person wishes the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Request a recorded votes.
Accordingly, sorry, that's the wrong page. Make sure I get to the right one. Pursuant to Standing Order 45, the division stands deferred until Tuesday, February 27, 2024, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect if you were to canvass the House, you'd find unanimous consent at this time to call it 6:30, so we could possibly begin the late show.
Is there unanimous consent to see the clock at 6:30? Is it agreed? It is agreed. In accordance with Standing Order 38, a motion to adjourn the House is deemed to be made and seconded at this time. Therefore, the question is that this House do now adjourn. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honor to address the House virtually this evening and pursue a matter that I first raised in question period late last year, 2023, October 27th. And Mr. Speaker, it deals with an issue that's of concern to many Canadians, which is that just at the time that Canadians are feeling pain at the pumps, and while I know my colleagues on the Conservative side of the House think that's due to the carbon tax, it's far more due to the excess profits that are being experienced by the oil and gas sector. Minuscule impact is from carbon pricing. But we know that ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, and I don't think I can show it there without pulling my jacket up, that we stand with Ukraine. But ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, it's had a very serious impact on fossil fuel prices globally. It's been to the benefit of large fossil fuel companies that they're reaping extraordinary profits, record-breaking profits in the tens of billions of dollars every month all around the world. It would be fantastic if our sanctions against Russia bit deeply enough to mean that selling Russian oil would become off limits, but we know that many countries continue to buy Russian oil. The modest proposal that I raised in question period comes from the honorable colleague from Kitchener Centre, who has put forward motion 92 to put an excess profits tax on oil and gas that is as is currently done for insurance companies and banks. It's a very reasonable proposal to apply the Canada Recovery Dividend to fossil fuel companies. Now, this particular proposal, motion 92, has been reviewed, and the benefits to the Canadian Treasury have been calculated by the Parliamentary Budget Office at over $4 billion. In other words, funds we could be receiving as a nation from excess profits, which are, when we look at these excess profits, as Eric regularly in the business pages of the Globe and Mail noted some time ago, these profits aren't based on business acumen or sound planning or great management by the oil and gas sector. They're pure and simple war profiteering. That's what they are. They're making a lot of money as Ukrainians face the brutality of Putin's regime. Other countries are applying excess profits tax at much higher levels than that's proposed by my colleague in motion 92. In fact, motion 92 itself points out that in the United Kingdom, they're charging excess profit taxes at a level of 25%, generating £5 billion, and Europe is charging excess profit tax at 21%. This modest proposal, using the same Canada Recovery benefit that is currently being applied to oil and gas, to banking and insurance, would be at 15%. Now, when the Honourable Minister of Environment responded to my question, I can't say he answered it, but when he responded to it, he spoke of other things the government is doing. He didn't speak of the finance question at all. Why are we not taxing the excess profits of the oil and gas sector at the very time that they are reaping extraordinary rewards in war profiteering? They are also hiking prices at the pump and profiteering from price gouging. It's certainly overdue to ensure that we bring in the profits from the oil and gas industry through proper taxation, bring them into national revenues so they can be used on such things as the disability tax credit, so the poorest of the poor in this country can receive additional financial support in this time when we're all feeling the pinch from the affordability crisis. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the Parliamentary Secretary will provide a better answer than the Minister did. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I always enjoyed having exchanges with the leader of the Green Party. I know she gives a great deal of thought to her presentations and ultimately her questions. And I think some questions are a little easier to answer than others. We have a Prime Minister, and through the Prime Minister, a Minister of Finance, our Deputy Prime Minister, who has taken the issue